Shabbos, then we'll move on to something else hopefully tomorrow. And that is, we talked yesterday and last week about the structure of the tefillos of Shabbos and the particular lessons that we learn, and how every single Shabbos we can go through those transitions and those transformations. But again, let me remind you that the most important thing to remember is Chazal's statement that Misha Mechen B'Erev Shabbos Yechol B'Shabbos, that in order to have food on Shabbos, you have to prepare Me'erev Shabbos. And thank you. And although literally that refers to food as well, either cook, buy, or get an invitation, got to do something. But it also refers to the spiritual soul food of Shabbos, that if one wants to benefit from all that Shabbos offers, you have to have a hachana, you have to prepare yourself beforehand, by learning, by meditation, so to speak, by just thinking about Hashem and the holiness of Shabbos, and then your neshama can absorb the tremendous light that Shabbos Kodesh is. The Arachim HaKadosh writes that it's an interesting thing. It says in the Chododi that Shabbos is Makor HaBracha. Shabbos is the source of all blessing. What does it mean it's the source of blessing? So he says, every Shabbos, although it's inconsistent with the notion of rest, Hashem puts into the world spiritual energy that will keep the world alive for another 6 days. The world is only renewed 6 days at a time. Again, there's a kasha. Some say the world is recreated every second. Okay, but the Arachim says Hashem renews the world in 6 days increments, and the kiyum of the world for the next 6 days depends on how the Jewish people keep Shabbos. So he says that if chas v'shalom there would not be a Jew that's keeping Shabbos in the world would not exist. In other words, it would end on Shabbos. It would not continue into Sunday, because you literally don't have a conduit that brings bracha into the world, that keeps it going. And that is the meaning of Shabbos being Makor HaBracha, the source. So now let's go back a little bit. In Parshas Kisisa, we had the paragraph which some say it's Ma'ariv, and we say it Shabbos morning, V'shomru v'nei Yisrael es ha-Shabbos, that Bnei Yisrael should keep Shabbos, La'asais es ha-Shabbos l'deireisam, B'ris olam, that Shabbos should be kept for all generations, the Bris Olam as an eternal covenant of our relationship with Hashem. So the Arachim says a very interesting halacha, and it's very shver because it's keneged the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. The Arachim says, look at the pasuk. Bnei Yisrael should keep Shabbos la'asais es ha-Shabbos. So it's a little shver. Why do I keep Shabbos? I keep Shabbos in order to keep Shabbos. What does it mean, I keep Shabbos in order to keep Shabbos? So the Gemara in Yuma says the following. This is one of the sources for the heter of pikuach nefesh. How do we know that if somebody's life is in danger, I am permitted, even commanded, to otherwise do what would otherwise be a violation of Shabbos, right? What's the makor of pikuach nefesh? So one makor is v'chai bahem, which is the general makor for pikuach nefesh overriding the Torah. The Torah was given so we should live. When keeping the Torah will take away your life, except for the three most chomer aveiros, you violate the Torah. Actually, I remember I first heard I first heard this drush of v'chai bahem, like when I was in 5th grade or something. So I thought it was a joke. Oh, come on, you're kidding. V'chai bahem, you got to live, therefore you can violate the Torah. But that's the real drasha. V'chai bahem means that the Torah was given for life, and therefore, if life is endangered, you don't keep the Torah. Right? That's v'chai bahem. But there's another makor the Gemara gives, which is Shabbos specific. Doesn't apply to Kashrus, doesn't apply to Yom Kippur, and that is better to desecrate one Shabbos in order that there should be many Shabboses that are kept. Because if a person dies, he'll never keep Shabbos again. So let's desecrate one Shabbos in order that there should hopefully, now you don't know for sure. I mean, let's say the guy's not religious, but even then, he can do tshuva, he could change, right? So we desecrate Shabbos in order that we should have many shabboses. This is a svara. Chalel alav Shabbos achas, kidei sheyishmor shabboses harbe. So the Arachim says, where did Chazal get that svara? They actually get it from the pasuk. V'shomru b'nei Yisrael es Shabbos, keep Shabbos, lasais es Shabbos, in order that there should be other shabboses. Meaning, when the keeping of your Shabbos will not result in other shabboses, because the guy's going to die, then you don't keep Shabbos. In other words, that's good for the svara. When do you keep Shabbos? I keep Shabbos in order that there should be other shabboses. But when keeping Shabbos will mean I'm not going to have other shabboses, in other words, the guy will die, then you don't keep Shabbos. And that's gufa, the source of the principle, Chalel olav Shabbos achas, kidei sheyishmor shabboses harbe. It's gufa from that pasuk. There you see it in the pasuk. Now, again, let me emphasize, this doesn't mean for sure the guy will keep Shabbos. We are mechalel Shabbos, even for a non-religious Jew, right? But nevertheless, there's always the hope that he will keep many Shabboses, or at least one more Shabbos. Okay, do you want to say?
Yeah. Well, why doesn't the svara apply to the three things that a person must die?
Yeah, so you're right. So logically, it might apply to those other things too, but we have other drushos. We have drushos that say you have to give your life for those three. I mean, each one is a drusha. Now, here's what the Arachim says, and this is where it's very schwer. The Arachim says, let's say a person is in such a condition of sickness that even, and he's going to die, but even if I intervene to save his life on Shabbos, he's going to die before next Shabbos. So he's never going to keep another Shabbos. The Arachim says you cannot desecrate Shabbos to save his life. Because if the reason why I desecrate Shabbos to save his life is in order that he should possibly keep another Shabbos, where it's a davar borer that even if I save his life today, he's going to die before next Shabbos, then there's not going to be another. Now, of course, this is a very unrealistic scenario because you never know. Okay, granted, but this is a theoretical question. And the theoretical point of the Arachim is, if there's not going to be another Shabbos, you're not allowed to desecrate this Shabbos. This is a din that the Arachim says, la halacha, that the only heter to be mechalel Shabbos for a chayla sheyesh lai sakana is if al yedei your chilul Shabbos, there is at least a possibility, it doesn't have to be a certainty, at least a possibility he may live for another Shabbos. Well, this is logical in a sense, at least as a theoretical rule, because if the heter is desecrate one Shabbos in order that he should keep many Shabboses, well, many, so the Arachim says many at least means one, even though many implies more than that, but there has to be one Shabbos that he's keeping. If you're not going to have one extra Shabbos, if you're not going to have that, you can't do it. On the other hand, it is mamish fakert from the Gemara in Yuma and connected a psak of the Shulchan Aruch that says, you are mechalel Shabbos even if you could give the person 1 minute of life, 1 second of life. Let's assume that without my intervention, he's going to die at 2 o'clock. And if I'm mechalel Shabbos, I can keep him alive till 5 after 2. The halacha is we are mechalel Shabbos, even for a minute of life, a second of life, right? Because that's considered to be infinite value. The Meiri says, for example, that in a second of life, a person could have a thought of tshuva that would give him a kapara for all of his sins. Even, by the way, and even if they're in a coma, you don't know what the mind is, really doing at that particular point. So the chayra, how could the Arachim? So the Arachim is basically saying you're only allowed to be mechalel Shabbos if there's a chance a person's going to live for a week. That's what he's saying. Right, next Shabbos. If he's not going to live for a week, says the Arachim, you're not allowed to be mechalel Shabbos. The kasha is, we paskin, that you're mechalel Shabbos even for a minute. Right? So how could the Arachim contradict what the Gemara in Yuma says and the like? So there's a beautiful teretz that I saw on this, B'Shem Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zichrono Livracha. And it's really very, very brilliant, although it's not clear that you could fit it into the Arachim Legamri. But let me tell you the teretz that he gives. There's an interesting shaila like this. When we transgress the Torah for a chola that's b'sakana, so the general rule is you got to try to minimize the avera that you're doing. I mean, let's say, for example, let's say someone needs to eat, right? So for shteitzach, you're not going to give them treif if you can give them kosher, because then you could avoid the transgression totally, right? So similarly, even if you're going to have to do an avera, you always do the lesser avera. And the Gemara in Yuma has all sorts of lists and all sorts of hierarchies. What is a more chomer avera? What is a less chomer avera? And you have to try to do the less chomer avera before you do the more chomer avera, right? All sorts of things like that. So now, let's consider the following shaila. Let's assume you have a chayla, and the chayla has to eat. And there's literally no kosher food in the house or with the neighbors, right? You're in the desert. And you only have two choices. You have a piece of ham to give him, which is treif, or you could shecht a kosher animal. Now the cooking you're going to do mimanashach. I mean, let's assume both the ham and the treif would have to be cooked. So the bishul you're going to do no matter what. But what is better to do? Is it better to give him treif, or is it better to shecht the kosher? The cooking you'll do either way. So if you simply ask the question, which is a more chomor avera, chazer or chilul Shabbos, there is no question that chilul Shabbos is a more chomer avera. Chilul Shabbos is a chiyuv skila. It's a chiyuv misa. Eating chazer is malchus. You just get lashes for eating chazer. It's only a lav. It's not a chiyuv misa. And we know that chilul Shabbos is considered to be kaifer b'maaseh bereishis. It's considered to be idol worship. Eating chazer is very bad, but it's not the chaimer of avodah zarah. So if we're simply asking, which is the lesser sin, chazer is a lesser sin than malacha on Shabbos. So we might have thought maybe better for me to give him chazer, which I'll cook. I mean, the cooking will be mutter either way. That's the only way you can eat it. Better to give him chazer than to do an act of chilul Shabbos. And yet the Ran says not that way. The Ran actually says that if we have a choice, we shecht a kosher animal rather than give him treif meat. Why is that so? Shabbos is more chamor. So there are a few different answers that the Rishonim give. And this is the halacha. Reason number one is quantity versus quality, because here's the story. Shechting the animal is a very chamor avera. It's a malacha. But it's only one sin, the sin of shechting. By treif, every kazayas the person eats is a new avera. So essentially, the choice I have is it better to do one big sin, or put it another way, which is worse, one big sin or many smaller sins? So la halacha, the Ran says, there's a svara that it's better to do one avera rather than 5 averas. Therefore, better to do one big sin of shechting instead of causing the transgression of 5 smaller sins by eating 5 kazayas. Now, it could be, according to that svara, if the chayla only had to eat 1 kazayas of treif, maybe I would go with the 1 kazayas because it's only 1 avera. But assuming he has to eat more than 1 kazayas, this is what the poskim call riboy hakamos. The increase of the quantity overrides echos, overrides the qualitative nature of the avera, and that is why it is better to shecht on Shabbos, where you're doing one big sin, instead of being meichel him treif or chazer, in which you're doing many smaller sins, assuming he's eating more than 1 kazayas. That's reason number one. Reason number two that is given is psychological. And that is that assuming that the chayla is a religious Jew, to feed him treif would be so devastating to him that he might vomit it up and he might get sick and it may kill him. So as a result, better to give him kosher, because even though that was procured by Chilul Shabbos, it's kosher food, and as a result, it'll enter into his body. Meaning there's actually a fear for the psychological destabilization of the chayla, which ultimately can be injurious to his health, and it may kill him, right? One could imagine a Jew that kept kosher all of his life, and we're giving him something that's chazer. Of course, you'd be allowed to cover it up, by the way. You don't have to tell him it's chazer. But assuming he knows that it's chazer, one could imagine his body literally vomiting up. They tell a story about Rav Moshe, although Rav Moshe Tendler, his son-in-law, says it's not true. But okay, I don't know. I'll tell you a story, and I don't want to hear from anybody that they know it's not true, because I also know it may not be true. So you don't have to tell me. But I'll tell you the story because it's an interesting possibility, and that is, they say that Rav Moshe once had milk in his coffee that he thought was Chalav Yisrael, and it turned out not to be Chalav Yisrael. And it basically says he vomited. He had to leave the room and vomit. His body could not take something that was not at the highest level of kashrus. And by the way, this happens to be very interesting for another reason. Rav Moshe, as many of you might know, has a very interesting shita about Chalav Yisrael, a very great leniency about Chalav Yisrael that many people in the United States follow. What is the din of Chalav Yisrael? Again, I'm digressing, but a little extra knowledge doesn't hurt. Chalav Yisrael is a din in the Mishnah, in Maseches Avodah Zarah, that the Chachamim prohibited drinking milk, even from a kosher animal, from a cow, if a Jew was not present as a mashgiach at the time of the milking, because the Rabbanan were afraid that perhaps the guy would mix with the kosher milk of a non-kosher animal such as a horse or even a pig. And therefore, even if that didn't happen, the Chachamim said you have to have Chalav Yisrael. That doesn't mean a Jew milks it, but milk that was witnessed. The milking had to be witnessed by a Jew. This is called Chalav Yisrael. Rav Moshe had a famous tshuva in which he said that when you live in a society that has governmental regulation against adulteration of food products, and if somebody were to adulterate the milk with some other animal, they could be prosecuted and they could go to jail. That is just as good as a Yisrael watching the milk, and therefore Rav Moshe was machalik. Rav Moshe said, in the United States or in first world countries where there's a system of supervising food, Rav Moshe says you could be some. This is called chalav stam. Chalav stam means chalav that was not supervised by a Jew, but there is what's called a mirsas factor, a fear factor that takes the place. Now, many do not hold of Rav Moshe's psak. Most of the yeshiva world, in America as well, keeps chalav Yisrael. Certainly Hasidim keep chalav Yisrael. But Rav Moshe gave such a heter, but he personally never relied upon it. And the story says that when he had non-Chalav Yisrael, he vomited it up. He did not rely on that. And he also said yeshivas should not rely on the heter even if they have to spend extra money, because it's kedai for chinuch to communicate to our talmidim at all levels that we will spend money in order to do mitzvahs properly. And the truth is, today, unless you live in a small town, Chalav Yisrael in America is relatively easy to get, although it's a little more expensive. But when Rav Moshe wrote the tshuva in the 50s and the like, it actually was very, very hard to get. There was not a lot of Chalav Yisrael, and it actually was a hardship. By the way, one other Chalav Yisrael story about Rav Moshe that's very funny. This is more of a humorous story, and this I think actually is true. And that is, in New York, there were two milk companies that provided Chalav Yisrael. I don't remember their names, but there were two different companies. And Rav Moshe was at a bris, and there were two milk cartons, Company A and Company B. So Rav Moshe picked up the milk carton of Company A, he then put it down, and then he picked up milk carton Company B and poured the milk. So Company A was devastated. Everybody's watching Rav Moshe as like a hawk, and they see he picked up, the milk carton Company A and put it down. Rav Moshe doesn't trust them. It's not good Chalav Yisrael. He went to Company B. Company A is going to go bankrupt. So Company A contacted Rav Moshe. What's wrong with our milk? What's chisaron is in our milk? Rav Moshe says, I don't know what you're talking about. The carton was empty. He picked it up. But people watched. People were so careful to watch him that everything he did. So Mr. Shem, when you guys become Gedolim, be very careful because people are watching your every move and the like. In fact, they say with Rav Meir Simcha. Rav Meir Simcha once wrote a letter and he addressed it in Hebrew. He addressed a Hebrew name. And he then went to the post office to retrieve the letter. What was the shaila? Because this was a name in which there's a machlokes how to spell it in a get. In a get, you have to have exact spelling. And Rav Meir Simcha was afraid that they would use the way he wrote it in the envelope as proof of how you write a get, and he did not want to give a psak then. So he retrieved the letter and he wrote it in Russian letters instead of Hebrew letters. He did not want people to use his envelope as a raya. So what a gadol does, people pay very, very close attention to. Okay. Yeah.
If we're in a place that we have accessible templates from in our everyday like supermarkets like that, are we still able to rely on the heter of getting nachlash from milk?
Well, listen, the truth of the matter is you shouldn't rely on it. That's the emes. I mean, if you live in a place... Now, again, if you have children and, they need milk and the Chavitzol is not accessible, so you can certainly rely on Rav Moshe for that, and absolutely. But, where you live in Flatbush, whatever it is, what heter would there be not to have Chalav Yisrael? It's all over the place. Baltimore. So Rav Moshe himself, it's a controversial heter, number one. A lot of people are not makabel it at all. And Rav Moshe himself says one should keep the halacha of Chalav Yisrael. He's a malamed zechus for people who are in places of hardship and difficulty. Now, there is another machlokas about video cameras. In other words, that's actually a contemporary machlokas. I mean, let's assume that there's no mashgiach at the milking, but there's a video camera in which a mashgiach or a rav, even if he's not watching at the time of the milking, but everything's recorded and he can see exactly if anything was added to the milk. So that's a big machlokas. Some American hashgachos will rely on video cameras to qualify as Chalav Yisrael. Others say you have to have either a person there or l'chol hapachos, a live feed, somebody who is actually watching b'shas ma'isa, which this does not do. So those are other machloksim regarding Chalav Yisrael and the like. How did I get onto this? I don't know. I was talking about the machlokas about should you shecht on Shabbos or should you be Michael treif? So even though Chilul Shabbos is more chamor, we have, so far I gave you two svaras why we paskin you shecht on Shabbos. One svara is because shechting on Shabbos is only one big aveira. Eating treif is 10 small aveiras, and therefore it's worse to do 10 small as opposed to one big. The second, I know I brought this up. I brought it because of vomiting. I was saying you give meat to somebody in treif, they may vomit it up, just like Rav Moshe. It was agav the agav, just as Rav Moshe vomited up the Chalav Yisrael. On that story, by the way, Rav Moshe Tendler says it's not true, and in a way, I could see it's not true because I don't think HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be machshel Rav Moshe to have. The Gemara says that even the animals of tzaddikim, Hashem will not let them eat something improper. Kal v'chaymer tzaddikim. So I can hear the idea that Hashem would not enable Rav Moshe to eat. In fact, they tell another story, similar to this. The Beis Halevi once went with somebody, and they stopped at an inn, and it was supposed to be kosher food or whatever it was, and the Beis Halevi had a companion, and there was chicken. And the person said, this is the best chicken. I've never had chicken as good as this, so geschmack. But the Beis Halevi said, I have an upset stomach, I can't eat anything today. So the person then asked the cook, and I don't remember the details of how this happened. He says, like, why does this chicken taste so good? So he said, oh, well, I decided to add butter to the recipe. I don't know exactly how that happens in a kosher place. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of made the Beis Halevi sick so he would not have something that was usher. They say by the Vilna Gaon, forgive me for all the stories, they say by the Vilna Gaon, imagine this, that a woman brought a chicken to the Vilna Gaon, and she asked for a psak, is the chicken a treifa or not a treifa? And the Vilna Gaon paskined, it was a treifa. So she then said, this is kind of crazy, oh, I had asked the young Rav who's in charge of the neighborhood shabbos, and he told me it was mutter. So I went to you to kind of get confirmation, and you're telling me it's usher. So the Vilna Gaon said, it's treif. I'm sorry, it's treif. So the young Rav, imagine the chutzpah, who came to the Vilna Gaon and said, Rebbe, I'm nothing compared to you, but I am the Rav of this neighborhood, and the people have given me the responsibility to paskin shabbos. And if a Rav paskin something's mutter, the same way if a Rav paskin something usher, another Rav cannot say it's mutter, it also applies the other way as well. So he said to the Vilna Gaon, I'm geyser on you that you will have to eat from this chicken because I paskin that it was mutter. As strange as it sounds, the Vilna Gaon said, you're right, I will eat from the chicken. And the Vilna Gaon was shaking, he was quivering, he was crying. He said, you paskin that it was mutter, you're the Rav, I have to listen to you. But the Vilna Gaon was so upset. And they say that as they were cooking the chicken, the candles in those days were made of sheep tallow, not paraffin. They were treif. A candle fell off the menorah, fell off the candelabra into the chicken pot, making it treif. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved the Vilna Gaon from eating something that the Vilna Gaon thought was treif. Right? So we have all sorts of stories of HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects the great tzaddik from being nichshel. So I do see Rav Tendler's point that perhaps the Chol Yisrael thing didn't happen. Okay, but be it as may, going back to the main issue, so we have two svaras so far, right? Svara number one is quantity versus quality. Svara number two is the psychological devastation of eating treif that might adversely affect health and might even kill the person. But the Ravid gives a third svara, which is more abstract. And the Ravid says the following. Your choice between shechting on Shabbos and feeding treif is not a choice between lesser sin and a greater sin. Rather, when you desecrate Shabbos in order to enhance a future Shabbos, it's not an action of chilul Shabbos at all. You're not desecrating Shabbos because you're doing something to create a greater Shabbos. So treif, the pshat is, you're doing an aveira, but you're doing it for pikuach nefesh. When I desecrate Shabbos, kedei sheyishmor shabboses harbe, it's not a chilul Shabbos by definition. It's not a chilul Shabbos. That's the difference between v'chai bahem and chalel olav Shabbos achas. V'chai bahem says you are allowed to commit a sin in order to save a life. Chalel olav Shabbos achas k'dei sheyishmer shabboses harbe says your act is not an act of desecration of Shabbos because it's going to promote the greater observance of Shabbos. You see the difference? The difference basically is v'chai bahem is permission to commit a sin. Chalel olav Shabbos achas is telling you it's not a sin to begin with. Because what you think is a violation of Shabbos is actually causing Shabbos to be kept better. So Memela, the Ravid says, if my choice is do something that's not a sin versus do something that is a sin, v'shteisach, you pick the choice that's not a sin. and that is Shabbos. So here, so all of this is these are the Ran and the Ravid. So now let's go back to Rav Yaakov. Rav Yaakov says the following. What did the Arachim say? The Arachim said, you're not allowed to be Machalal Shabbos to save somebody who is not going to live till the next Shabbos, because you don't have a future Shabbos he's going to keep. So says Rav Yaakov, the Arachim doesn't mean you let him die. The Arachim just means you no longer have the lumdus of Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas to say that it's not an Aveira. It is an Aveira, but you still have the heter of a Chai Bahem, which says you're allowed to do an Aveira to save a life. But once you don't have Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas, and you're only operating under V'chai Bahem, then the Ravid would actually say, unlike the other two reasons, better to give him treif than to shecht on Shabbos. Because shechting on Shabbos is a more chomer avera. In other words, what the Arachim means is the following. If he's not going to live for a week, and you have a choice between shechting on Shabbos or giving him treif, you should actually give him treif. Because you no longer have the Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas, Kidei Sheyishmer Shabboses Harbe, that will take away the Aveira, but you still have the heter of V'chai Bahem. But V'chai Bahem, I would say, again, not like the other two reasons, that V'chai Bahem would say treif is better than Shabbos, because Shabbos is more chomer. This is mamish a gevaldige point. In other words, the Ravid is teaching us a very important yesod, to repeat this. The Ravid is teaching us that the heter to desecrate Shabbos that is derived from V'chai Bahem is a different dynamic than the heter to be Mechalel Shabbos that is derived from Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas Kidei Sheyishmer Shabboses Harbe. V'chai Bahem is a heter to violate the Torah in order to save a life, except for the Gimel Chamuros. Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas is saying, when your Chilul Shabbos can result in more shabboses, it's not a sin at all. So it's only on that aspect that says the Arachim there has to be another Shabbos. But if you're not going to have another Shabbos, you still have V'chai Bahem. But V'chai Bahem is matering Averis. It's not saying it's not an Aveira. Memela, the Ravid would actually say better to shecht on Shabbos. I mean, again, like the other two svaras, that wouldn't make a difference. But the Arachim, the Rav Yaakov says, is going with the svara of the Ravid. This mamish a very, I mean, I hope this is not too convoluted, but this is a very, very ingenious explanation, at least b'derech drush a little bit, in what the Arachim is saying. Now, the truth of the matter is, the Chalel Olav Shabbos Achas Kidei Sheyishmer Shabboses Harbe, you got to be careful. We don't apply this in all cases. I mean, this is like saying, if I drive to Shul, it'll make me frummer in the long run. We don't necessarily give such a heter. On the other hand, let me share with you, I'm sure you've heard it over the years, a very, very famous, controversial little bit psak of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And this is a shaila that comes up quite a lot. Can I invite somebody to my house for Shabbos if they are going to drive on Shabbos? Or either my house to a Shabbaton, to a yeshiva. Can I invite people who are going to be Mechalel Shabbos in either getting here or in leaving, when they leave in the middle of Shabbos? Now, what's the shaila? The shaila is, Lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. I'm not allowed to cause another person to sin. So if I'm inviting you to my house, knowing you're going to drive, I'm causing you to drive on Shabbos. Lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. Rav Moshe had a famous tshuva going back to the 1950s, in which Rav Moshe said it's absolutely usher. I cannot invite somebody if I know they're going to drive. Meaning, I invite a person, I offer him a place to stay for Shabbos, If he says, no, I'd like to come for Friday night and leave, Rav Moshe says, sorry, I withdraw the invitation. That was Rav Moshe's position. And Ad Kedei Kach, he even said that when Shabbatons are advertised, now of course, if a Shabbaton is advertised, you can't stop a person from driving, but you can't send a specific mailing to non-religious people. You put up general signs. If they come, they come. You can't stop that. But you don't target people who are going to drive. That was Rav Moshe's psak. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, around 30 years later, had a different decision. And, for many years, this was actually a letter that Rav Auerbach wrote to Rav Michael Schon, who used to be a Rebbe in Or Sameach for many years, and he was close to Rav Shlomo Zalman. And for many years, this was an unpublished letter. And people would sometimes talk. I remember this when I was in yeshiva. So hearing about this secret letter that was sent to Or Sameach. Right? Little did I know I would someday be in Or Sameach. But I remember, Or Sameach was the only place, just like there's a guy at the University of Maryland who had the only federal license to use LSD, an official federal license, right? So Or Sameach was the only place in the world that had a license that they could invite people who would drive on Shabbos. And I remember people talking about this, there was some aura of secrecy. Well, it's no big secret. It is published in Chelek Aleph of Rav Shlomo Zalman's Tshuvas, Minchas Shlomo, so you could see it and it's written down, and we no longer have the ownership of this particular letter. And Rav Shlomo Zalman actually paskined that you are allowed to invite a person, even if you know they're going to drive. There are a few conditions. Number one, you do have to offer them a comfortable place for all of Shabbos. That means a comfortable place, not a fake. So if you're inviting 100 people, you have to have 100 places. You can't play averages. You can't say, well, I only have 10 places. I'll invite 100 people. Only 10% are going to show up. No, you have to have a place for every person you invite. It has to be decent, although what that means is not always going to be that clear. But if they say they're going to come no matter what, you're allowed to invite them. And Rav Moshe Sternbach, who is a machmer normally, says the same thing, including your parents or whatever it is. And there are two different reasons, though, and the reasons are a little different. One reason is that if this is a long-term way to perhaps get a person interested in Yiddishkeit and Shabbos, so you have the svara be machalel one Shabbos in order that many Shabboses will be kept. In other words, if someone is not going to be experiencing a religious Shabbos, and they're not willing to do so unless they drive, how will they ever become religious? Right? You can't really do it during the week as much. So Memela, Rav Shlomo Zalman said that, now again, he's not saying the guy has a heter to drive. The guy does not have a heter to drive, but I have a heter to extend an invitation even though I know he's going to drive. Don't confuse the two, okay? We're not giving a heter to the Chilul Shabbos. We're giving a heter to the invitation. Now, if you look at the heter based on the long-term potentiality, then maybe you have to differentiate between the type of event that's going on. Meaning, if it's a Shabbaton, if it's a JLE, if it's a program of education and chinuch, or if you, with your Shabbos guests, you talk about Torah, so then you might have Rav Shlomo Zalman's heter. If it's going to be a social event, where people come in and have some drinks and whatever it is, then you don't necessarily have a cheshbon that's going to lead to a long-term Shabbos observance. So that may depend on the program. But there's another svara that even if it's not going to lead to long-term Shabbos observance, it may be mutter. And this is very interesting. Because on balance, even though you're causing a sin, you might be preventing more sins, because you have to look at the alternative. I invite a non-religious person to my house for Shabbos, even if there's not going to be any future Shabbos he's going to keep, and you never know. But for the 3 hours he's with me, not doing malacha, hearing kiddush, benching, saying brachos, al natila shadayim. Now, if I don't invite him, so good, he won't be driving to my house. Okay? So you're right. If I invite him, I'm causing him to drive to my house. If I don't invite him, he's not going to drive to my house. He may drive to the beach. He may drive to the mall. In other words, it's hard to figure this out. But it might very well be that by the chilul Shabbos that you're causing him to do, in the net, he's doing less chilul Shabbos. Now that's an interesting svara because that would apply even if there's not going to be a future Shabbos he's going to keep. This Shabbos Gufa, he's better off. So for these various reasons, and there's enough community between the svaras, if you look at the future potential, then if it's like a purely social Shabbos, maybe not. But if you look at the fact that even for this Shabbos, he's actually sinning less, then even if it's not going to have a follow-up effect, it might be kedai that it's mudra. So these are things to think about. Again, if this is nogeya to anybody, they should talk to a Rav about it. It's not always going to be so pashut. But as I say, surprisingly, Rav Moshe's chumrah is not widely followed. It's interesting that Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Sternbach is the hanhaga that most of us are nayeg today. But it's interesting that this is another application of chalel olav Shabbos achas kedei sheyishmor shabboses harbe. Okay, so that's anyway. Going back to the Arachim, this is Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's beautiful interpretation of what the Arachim means, that you don't desecrate Shabbos if he's not going to live for another week. Okay, take care.